Hello, readers, writers, elves, goblins, two-eyeds, whoever is watching or listening, really. Coming to you from Melbourne, Australia. I moved from Sydney, only to be hit with 3 consecutive lockdowns already in Victoria since I've been here. Help me, I'm in pain. You are with Just Wanna Reads today, and I'm going to talk about tropes. For those that don't, a trope is commonly a reoccurring literary and rhetorical devices. Things like cliches in creative works, such as narratives, TV, movies, all that sort of thing. A couple of generic examples might be the chosen one trope, where someone is chosen to be part of a prophecy, but not necessarily, and has a special gift or power that makes them stand out from everyone else. So that's definitely a trope. There are all sorts of tropes. There are plot tropes, romance tropes, tropes for LGBT relationships. There are straight tropes. There are beginning tropes, villain tropes. Literally any situation you can probably conceive of in fiction has a trope reference, and 1,000 fan fictions on AO3 ready for you. So the first thing I want to go over is how useful are tropes. Tropes make up novels and stories in general. Marvel and Disney are packed full of them, and they're probably the most popular stories selling at the moment. Pretty much because, as far as movies go, superheroes make up 80% of them. And Disney has pretty much a monopoly on TV shows as well at the moment, with all the Disney Plus series coming out. Star Wars as well is hugely tropey. Almost every Marvel story is packed full of chosen one tropes. They may not all have prophecies and things like that, but they all have powers which make them special, more special than the people around them. There is the found family trope, where you lose your family and you find it in a new group, like with the Guardians of the Galaxy, for example. There is the death of the mentor trope, which is in The Lion King, where Mufasa falls about 1/3 of the way through the movie, like he falls and he dies, and leaves Simba to find his own path. There's so much of that in Disney. You could do an entire series just on tropes in Marvel and Disney and Star Wars, let alone all of fiction combined. So tropes definitely have a use, because if you took them out of most stories, they would completely fall apart. There's not much that isn't a trope nowadays. And if it isn't now, it will be in the future. Tropes have a particular use in searching for novels or fanfics, or movies, TV shows that you're going to enjoy. Like when you're looking for a horror show, you're always looking for some specific trope. For example, if I want to read a novel, I could just Google, say I want to read a fantasy novel that's about chosen one. It's got a chosen one character in it. I just Google chosen one young adult fantasy novels, or just fantasy novels with chosen ones. If I want a childhood friends to eventually they fall in love kind of thing, I can search for that, and you can find books just with that, or movies or TV shows just with that trope. Tropes aren't just good for finding books, but they're also a huge part of marketing too. You'll see it even in reviews on books, on say Goodreads, or sometimes even on the book ads that they put on YouTube, like those little trailers they put for books. But I wish they put these reviews on the novels instead of generic shit. Like sometimes you're looking at a novel and it'll say something like magnificent, sublime, said the New York Times. Who looks at a cover and goes, wow, the New York Times thought this book was magnificent, along with thousands of other books it's written on every single month. That tells me a lot about this novel. I am suddenly going to buy it now. I want to see more tropes in marketing, because the audience already knows what they like. If you're going to buy a book, you're going to spend money on a book, you've probably read 1,000 tropes before, and you're like, I know what I like and I know what I'm looking for. Okay? I mean, sometimes you like to just go out and buy a book in Britain you're sort of looking for, and that's fine. But if I saw reviews on books and it said best enemies to lovers story I've read in years, yes, I want you to put that shit all over the front and back cover. I want to know exactly what I'm getting into without precise spoilers. Some people might argue that's too close to spoilers, but for me, it's like picking up a fantasy book and going, I already know there's magic in it, so it's spoiled for me. Tropes make me more excited to see how an author deals with it in their own unique way. So I'm not really worried about being spoiled in that way. People may disagree with me, and that's fine. But knowing what tropes you read is also essential if you're someone who likes writing and wants to write. I absolutely love tropes around friends eventually becoming romantic, like a slow burn, or found family tropes. They're probably like my favorite. Both of these have made it into stories that I've written, one way or another. I think part of my own joy of writing comes from, there's this very niche trope I want done this specific way, and I can't find it anywhere else. So I guess I'll do it myself.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
So the second thing I wanted to talk about with tropes is, should we avoid them and or subvert them? Okay, subvert, for those people who haven't really heard that term before, it's like basically turning it in a way that you least expect. So we can lean into tropes and change them slightly. I feel like trying to go out of your way to subvert expectations every time doesn't always go well. There have been very successful subversions, like everyone who has seen Avengers Infinity War, that movie, no matter what you say about Marvel, that movie's always popular. Because at the end, basically, they lose, which is a subversion of all superhero tropes, all superhero fiction, because superheroes always end up winning. Even if it's just for one movie, the fact that they lose is a subversion of that genre itself. So there are unsuccessful subversions where they kill the main villain in an anticlimactic way, but do absolutely nothing with it. So everyone knows what I'm talking about when I'm talking about this. I'm looking at you, The Last Jedi. So in fairness, in that instance, it was a case of extreme inconsistency with directors and the stories they wanted to tell. Another example, though, is Iron Man 3. So there is a really bad example of this. The Mandarin was set up as this badass villain, and they had the greatest actor. They had Ben Kingsley playing him, only to reveal that the real Mandarin was some, like, generic, pasty-ass creep who wasn't intimidating at all. The reveal was made into a joke, and then the real reveal later on wasn't at all unpredictable or plot twisting as they thought it was. I guess the point I'm trying to make is subversions are great when they're done well, and tragic when you force these things to happen. And especially when it diminishes the characters and the feeling of the story just to force a plot twist that doesn't really work. Sometimes having a predictable ending or a predictable trope isn't bad at all. Another one that just came to mind is Game of Thrones. Oh, the ending to Game of Thrones. That endgame attempt at subverting our expectations went down as possibly the worst example of an ending in television history. Nobody talks about Game of Thrones anymore. And if they do, it's just to talk about how much they messed it up. Like, what a tragedy. I don't want to spoil specifically what happens, because it is an ending to a whole show, and some people may not have seen it yet. But damn. R.I.P. Ultimately, I love certain tropes, and I love to write certain tropes. I used to resist them all the time, but I lean into them now, and I try to make the journey rather than the trope itself unique. I think one of the main appeals to like a story like Harry Potter was probably that J.K. Rowling took a lot of tropes from adult fantasy fiction and rewrote it for younger audiences. That's pretty much a lot of the parts of Harry Potter are just big tropes that were used in fantasy fiction for a long time before Harry Potter. As far as tropes go, I'm just going to list some that I really liked. And And I'll put a link at the in the video at the bottom for people if they want to. There's this website called TV Tropes, and people may like to visit there and have a look at what tropes that they really like. And if you Google those tropes, you'll find books, movies, TV shows that relate to that trope. So one of my favorite tropes is childhood best friends to lovers. There was this really great book called Words in Deep Blue. I can't really express how much I love this novel. It's by Kath Crowley. She's an Australian author. She's from Victoria. And it's about a letter library in an old bookshop. So people will leave letters inside books. So people leave love letters, all sorts of things. And then other people will open the book and they don't know who it's from. But they'll read the book and they'll see the love letters. And there's like letters all through different parts of the books. And they might leave a letter that just says like, I love this page, I love the poem on it, or something like that. And it's basically about two best friends who fall in love. So yeah, that's one of my favorite tropes, is like childhood best friends who kind of reconnect and fall in love later on in life. The next, this is probably my favorite trope of all time, is the found family. So Six of Crows is probably the best version of this I've ever read or seen. And it is probably my favorite novel of all time. I've read it multiple times. The found family is perfect. For people who don't know, found family is basically like a family in fiction where none of them are related, but they all find each other and they all sort of create their own family because their own families are kind of all messed up and all that sort of thing. But in Six of Crows, the found family is perfect. They don't all love each other unconditionally, which some found families do. In fact, they try to kill each other multiple times. They're arseholes, but they're my arseholes. Guardians of the Galaxy is another good example of that too. Enemies to friends. Now, I know some people love enemies to lovers, but I love enemies to friends. It goes without saying, my favorite version of this is Tormund and Jon Snow from Game of Thrones. They start off as enemies, then they become allies, then they become enemies again, and then they are permanent allies. And I think that their brotherhood after their long-standing on opposite sides of a war is incredible, and it really makes you love them even more. And they're just like completely opposite personalities that would never, ever become friends if they hadn't been enemies first. I really love that trope.
My little crow.
One of the last tropes that I'm going to talk about as one of my favorites is like the rough, grisly old soldier who doesn't want to fight anymore, fights one last time for like a child he or she is protecting. My favorite version of this trope is probably Logan, the movie about Wolverine. So watching Wolverine go to all lengths to protect Laura, I absolutely love all stories where the old soldier is brought back into the fold and he's seeking redemption for past wrongs, and he gets wrapped into a conflict, usually about someone innocent like a child, or sometimes it's an animal even. But yeah, I absolutely love that. There's a good version of this trope in a new Netflix series too, Sweet Tooth, I think is called. If you've seen it, you know what I mean. But if you haven't seen it, definitely go and watch it. The last thing I think I wanted to go over was tropes and their role in fanfiction. Now, those who read fanfiction know that tropes are integral to fanfiction. There are tags for everything in fanfics now. Now, tags aren't necessarily tropes, but that's a whole different conversation. There are tropes where the characters are pulled from the fantasy / world setting and dropped into the real world. So they could be characters with the same names, the same personalities, they just don't have any powers and they're living an average everyday life. This is a huge trope in fanfiction, and that's just one example. Fanfiction tropes to me feel far more unique. Many novel tropes are great, but fanfic writers have a much larger scope for tropes. They have no publishing gatekeepers, they have no limits to what they write. If they can conceive of it, they can write it, basically. Now, I was just going to Google some tropes to see if I can prove my point. So I basically just looked up bad fanfic tropes or bad fanfics, and there's literally hundreds of fanfictions that came under bad fanfic. Um, oh god, this hurts my soul. Anyway, I want to look up some good ones now. I need some wholesome shit after that. So the other thing is that while it can, some ways fanfics are horrifying, in other ways they're the most free and beautiful form of writing, and by extension, tropes in fiction. So there's like wholesome tropes, fluffy, cute, genuine, love confessions, all sorts of stuff. You have pretty much all of fiction to choose from in fanfics. You can pick characters from entirely different worlds and plop them in the same setting. You don't have to worry about what is realistic or plausible. You can make Draco Malfoy and Katniss Everdeen be best friends from childhood in a Harry Potter Hunger Games mix-up world. Nobody's going to question it because if somebody doesn't like that fanfic, they can just move on. They're not paying for it. I think for me, the difference in tropes in fanfics versus books is that while books have tropes, they aren't entirely a trope. Sometimes a fanfic can have its entire story based around a trope, and it's fleshed out to an entirely new level where the trope feels so like unique and new. But yeah, that's basically all I have to say on tropes. And I mean, yeah, like and subscribe if you feel like it. Put some comments down below, tropes that you like or tropes that you don't like, and I'll reply, and we can have a trope off if you feel like it. I'm awkward.